Hello and welcome to Conversations. We are here in Dubai for the IATA World Cargo Symposium. And these are interviews that we do with global leaders of air cargo and logistics. And with me in conversation today is Ryan Keyrouse, co founder and CEO of Rotate. Ryan, great to have you once again for this interview.
Thanks, Reji. Always a pleasure to be here.
Ryan, but what is going around the world as of we have been reading about it, global trade, the impact of tariffs on global trade, the disruptions, uncertainties. What are you picking up for your customers and for the air freight industry?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think there's always a certain level of uncertainty and volatility in the air cargo industry, right? I mean, that's one of the characteristics of the industry, and the uncertainty and volatility is also one of the reasons that air cargo exists, right? Volatility in supply chains makes air cargo viable, but I think that the discussions I've had with various leaders in at airlines or otherwise is we have a strategy. We need to stick to that strategy. So I think that's one. And then two, you need to be nimble. You need to be agile on your feet because indeed things are changing overnight. So you do need to be able to adjust rapidly, make network decisions or flights, customers. But I think don't lose focus on that kind of like longer term goal. Finding that balance to do those two things at the same time, I think is really is the challenge at the moment because nobody really knows what's happening in any given day, right?
Ryan, Rotate deals with a lot of data that's available. Uh, are there any specific and noticeable trends that will affect the air cargo industry? And if so, what are they? Whether it is on the good or the bad,
Yeah.
what are there? Are there any specific trends that you're noticing, and are you picking up?
Yeah. So Rotate has both capacity data and global trade data, including estimates that we make for e-commerce. And what we see is that 52% of the Trans-Pacific, China to US, is e-commerce. Um, that's quite significant and will be impacted. So one of the key first decisions we made at Rotate was we looked at what was happening and we said, I think that the de minimis and the impact on e-commerce is going to be much more impactful to the industry than the tariffs. I mean, we've had tariffs before in 2018 with China. So that started 2018, 2019. Trade has only grown with China to the US since then. So yes, tariffs will have an impact, but this impact to the de minimis that's coming, that's going to have a much bigger effect. 52% of China to US is now estimated to be e-commerce. So we're talking about half of it. If you look on a longer term trajectory and go back to 2018 when e-commerce really started booming from nothing to 52%, if you drew a straight line and took, global trade, 4% growth, if you drew that straight line, you would see that half of that e-commerce would be there as general air freight today. So you're looking about half of e-commerce could be impacted. From our capacity data, we see freighters going across the Trans-Pacific. We estimate that much e-commerce is going to take 60 freighters, so 60 freighters worth of cargo of the global fleet. That's over 10% of the global freighter, wide body freighter fleet is flying e-commerce. If that gets impacted by half, that's 30 freighters on the Trans-Pacific that need to be redeployed. And so the tools that we provide around network optimization and sales steering, OD mix optimization, okay, those freighters are going to be redeployed where? Southeast Asia, India, the Gulf, Europe, Latin America, they need to be redeployed somewhere. And I think now more than ever, you need to be looking at data to understand what might those impacts be. The capacity data is updated hourly. So who's moving into my markets? What market opportunities are being impacted? Yeah, it's now more than ever. You need kind of data and visibility to be agile and nimble.
But are you already noticing the redeployment of the main deck capacity to other market? Because if you look at before the inauguration of President Trump, the last quarter of 2024, we have seen a shift in the a dramatic shift of main tech capacity into Trans-Pacific because it's the sheer volume of e-commerce. Now, with the uncertainties around, are you already seeing the movement of the capacity, main tech capacity from Asia to other places?
Yeah, so this year, right as all of this was being announced during Lunar New Year, makes it a little bit difficult to see the immediate impact of those announcements, which were then
Yeah,
paused or reversed or whatever
yeah,
whatever term you're allowed to use. It's difficult to quantify that because that happened exactly during Lunar New Year, where there's usually a dip in capacity on the Trans-Pacific anyway. There was also a nice coincidence and matchup this year between peak flower season and Lunar New Year. It doesn't happen every year. So it's hard to say how much of that movement and the capacity that we saw. There was indeed this year, more than the previous 4 years, more of an impact on capacity on the Trans-Pacific. Again, tied to Lunar New Year, tied to peak season of flowers elsewhere, and tied to this announcement. What we also saw, though, is in the 1, 2, 3 weeks after Lunar New Year, there was a it was the slowest recovery in the last 4 years to get back to pre-Lunar New Year levels. So something is up. We had heard that anecdotally, flights were getting canceled during that period. We heard that anecdotally. You do see in the data that this was the slowest recovery on the Trans-Pacific in the last 4 years after Lunar New Year. So 20 days after, we still didn't get back to full recovery, and in previous years, we would have been above pre-Lunar New Year. What we also see though now is that, especially with things about to be implemented, I think it's in 2 weeks' time, you see a lot of front loading. So actually, we don't see capacity being pulled on the Trans-Pacific, but you see more flights there for these charters trying to get in before the tariffs. So I think what will be really interesting is what happens immediately after those are then implemented. But you do see I mean, if you look macro, that you do see this airline did this airline has already moved a flight there. I mean, you do see those things in the data.
When you look at the belly cargo capacity, do you see any specific trends in there? And in terms of the proportion of belly cargo versus main tech cargo, is there a shift in terms of the proportion of cargo that is on the bellies and the proportion of cargo that is on the main tech? Is that almost like 50-50, 60-40?
Yeah, good question. So what we've seen is that since the recovery from COVID, we've seen that the passenger fleet has been coming back faster and faster, more so than the freighter fleet. I mean, the freighter fleet raised a lot of utilization during COVID. We see that most carriers today are still operating. All those freighters are still operating at near record utilization levels. So they haven't had there's been growth, there's been conversions, there's been some deliveries, but we don't see a lot of as much growth on the freighter side as we saw on passenger. Passenger has been growing more and more and more. Some trade lanes less. China US still hasn't fully recovered on the passenger side from COVID. Um, so we are at a point where it's 50-50. I don't see a shift now in the short term, but I think that if there's a negative impact to the air cargo market where freighters start to become less profitable, you can see airlines start to decrease utilization. That's one place to kind of manage capacity. But we also have 10% of the global fleet is delayed retirements, right? So there's a lot of aircraft that have been flying through all of those kind of high yield, high margin, high profitability for a carrier years they've been flying. At some point, those need to be retired. So at some point, 10% of the fleet needs to go away. So you might see like a short shift. There's of course longer term delays on Airbus and Boeing on the new freighters. So I don't see a shift yet, but I think if anything, if we see yields and demand get negatively impacted, I think you're going to start to see overdue retirements and potentially a shift back to some belly cargo taking more than 50%. But we're at 50-50.
Ryan, now back to our normal, very cliche topic of technology adoption and digitalization in air cargo industry. This is a topic that we keep discussing.
Yeah.
Do you see that there is much more clarity and focus on how and what air cargo industry players do in terms of what they want to achieve by technology adoption and digitalization to make their commercial business more successful and profitable?
I've been amazed by how at the response for our solutions at Rotate. I can talk in a minute about our cargo tech and cargo AI and Wiremind and Aerios and the things that they're doing. But just from our perspective as Rotate, I mean, there's a thirst and there's an energy and excitement for the things that we're doing. That's both on data, but also software, longer term planning, midterm kind of network planning, OD mix optimization, the sales cockpit, identifying opportunities. And all of those things are hyper relevant when the market is volatile, right? So if all of a sudden now there's going to be a big shift in demand and you need to redeploy flights, you need to identify opportunities for your network. Where should you fly? What are profitable places to fly? What's the achievable share if I add a new rotation? How should our sales team sell different ODs? What are the opportunities then? Because these might be new destinations. If you've been used to flying the Trans-Pacific, just picking up the phone over the last few years, you might now actually need to start selling new destinations. So I see quite some synergy with like digitalization and the market situation at the moment to kind of leverage those things. In general, I think that if you see the pickup around the booking platforms, so Indeed, also Cargo One, but also Cargo One, but also Web Cargo, but also Cargo AI. I think those things are growing. There's definitely a shift. I think the big, for me, is I was just talking about this with somebody during the lunch break. There's so much data. There's so much technology. The issue is really identifying where precisely to use it. What is the specific use case? Not trying to have technology be the answer to everything in kind of a blanket way. Not abusing technologies in the wrong way. Um, I do think I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to see. I've been to previous WCSs over the years, and we've always talked about technology, and we talked about AI, and we talked about it as this big, big word. And I think slowly over time, we're getting more use case driven. How exactly are we going to apply it to answer what question? And I think that's a more reasonable and pragmatic way to actually use the technology.
It looks very interesting. Like it's only when you have disruptions that actually is the time that you kind of look at various options of how you use technology. You've seen a digitalization, acceleration in digitalization in the air cargo industry during the pandemic. Uh, Now we are in a different situation of the evolving global trade tariffs. Do you see this as an occasion, as a moment for air cargo players to kind of really use technology, digital tools to really have a visibility into their business and really make it more commercially profitable?
I think there's for sure going to be a lot of technology challenges related to the tariffs and the de minimis. That's not going to be for Rotate to solve, but I mean, everything that's happening with being able to put tariffs visible to the consumer when they're buying. Um, there will definitely be technology answers to the current situation. From a Rotate perspective, it's going to be important to it sounds a bit boring, Reggie, but it's you got to look at the data. You got to figure out how you want to adjust and fly your network. You need to optimize the OD mix. You need to identify the sales opportunities for your salespeople. So if the market is volatile, that's a perfect way to, from a Rotate perspective, to use technology to again, as we said at the beginning of this discussion, right? Stick to your strategy, stick to like the longer term view, but you need to be nimble and make little adjustments to this volatility.
Right. Finally, give us an update on Rotate's sales cockpit and how many airlines do you use right now, and is there an updated version of it?
Yeah, hey, great question. So we've been live for almost a year.
Yeah.
So of course we launched with Etihad in May of 2024. We have 4 airlines that are live with it at the moment. We hope to end the year with 6 or 7. So it goes quite quickly. We're super excited. We see a lot of energy for this. So I think that yeah, we're definitely riding. Let's say we're riding a high with our customers having a lot of energy for this solution. So for us, from our perspective, execution, scalability. I mean, we've taken this, let's call it concept, and now we really need to accelerate on being able to implement it quickly and improve it. And indeed, you mentioned, is there a new version? It's in the works. So it's really like indeed improving it, making it better, faster, stronger. Absolutely.
Ryan, I wish you all the best, and to you and to your team. And as always, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Reggie. Appreciate it.